quote unquote real man was like the toxic or problematic masculinity. A good man, the same group of guys said honest, integrity, helping out the little guy, sacrifice, all of these other characteristics of what a quote unquote good man is. I'm a firm believer that a lot of my guys that I work with want to be good men. They really, really do. But it's not safe for them to be good men. It's not safe in society, even in some of their relationships, to be that sensitive, vulnerable self, because we're actually being policed by society and the world around us. So there's so much more pressure, and it's so much easier for us to stay in that quote unquote what a real man is, as opposed to take the risk and really go into that good man space.
What is your relationship with your mental health? Are you the type of person to grin and bear it, to kind of white knuckle your way through all your problems? Or have you sought help and counsel, whether it be a therapist, a psychologist, a shaman, a coach, a mentor? Finding someone who's relatable, experienced, and well-versed in mental health is super important to combat all the trials and tribulations that we all experience in life. Which brings me to this month's guest, Phil Treiber. He is a well-versed therapist. Phil goes by Dude Breathe Counseling on Instagram, and he works with men and couples to overcome all the challenges that we interface with life. It was a great conversation. Phil and I spoke about being a guy in this current climate, how to navigate through the choppy waters of life, and much, much more. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Phil Treiber. Enjoy.
Hey, this is Phil Treiber. I'm a licensed mental health counselor. I operate Dude Breathe Counseling down in South Florida. I just had an awesome time on the Vinny Brusco show. You can find me at Dude Breathe Counseling on Instagram. My website, www.dudebreathecounseling.com. Hit me up. Anybody who does gets responses. Have a wonderful day.
And here we go.
What's up, buddy?
Doing well.
How are you?
I'm doing well.
I've never met you before, but I feel like I've known you already. Is that a weird thing?
From social media, maybe we're texting back and forth for months trying to figure this out.
You're also a New York guy.
Yes, born and raised in Long Island.
Which is, I've been out there quite a few times. I worked out in West Babylon at WBAB.
I remember it.
Yeah, great radio station. But I think there's a New York energetic connection.
Yes.
That you can't replace and is palatable.
We're cut from a very specific cloth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you're with someone from New York, you kind of know you are, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have a different, because you're in Florida now. And
well, there's a lot of New Yorkers down there as well.
Yes, but there's a different tone to Florida than New York.
Yeah, but again, the same thing. There's so many Northeast people down there. It's like you'll see like bumper stickers on people's cars. This is like, go back to New York, right? And it's like, okay, fine. But then if you look at like the economy and everything else down there, it's like everyone's from the Northeast.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's does the pace down there throw you off, or have you? I mean, you've been down there for a while now. So
yeah, I've been down there 8 years. It's similar.
Right.
But it's also different.
Right.
So it's not as fast paced as like I was up here for some concerts about 2 weeks ago in New York City, and like the anxiety was building up in me. Right. Just I was like, okay, this is too much. Like too much. It was almost like sensory overload. And I grew up coming into the city. I mean, we used to take the train at like 13, 14, and we would like lie to all of our parents saying like, we're gonna sleep at, Johnny's house,
right,
Billy's. And then we would go into the city and like take the train back at like 6 or 7 a.m. just causing a ruckus. Not as bad as the movie Kids.
Sure.
But similar type stuff. So
sure.
I was really used to it. But then once I got down to Florida, like there is that similar vibe, but then it's also like a very influx of the beach thing. So like even like the New Yorkers, the people from Philly, the people from Mass or Jersey, they're all like kind of in beach mode or retirement mode. So it's the same energy, but also just like kind of dulled down a little bit.
It's a diluted version of it.
Yes.
So
yeah,
it's funny that you say that because, being in Westchester and being technically time-wise 15 minutes from the city, right? But then obviously traffic plays a huge factor in that. There is an energetic frequency that emanates from the city. It buzzes. And as you get closer into it, you feel it more. And I'm only 15 minutes out, but
right.
There's still that commuter person going to the train, and especially Monday through Friday, there is an energetic frequency here in Westchester that is palatable at times because it just it starts to buzz out from the city. It's very
Yeah.
weird, but it's real. It's a real thing.
I mean, the same thing, like when I was growing up on Long Island, a lot of our fathers or even the mothers themselves, like they would commute to the city, right, almost every day to
Right.
work there, right? Now, like my parents, my father like worked in a family business on the islands, like they weren't going into the city. But yeah, it's like always that like hustle and bustle, but then like coming out to the outskirts a little bit, it's different, but same, like same pasta, different sauce.
Sure.
It's almost like that escape outside of it, right? What do you call them? The bridge and tunnel crowd,
Right. Bridge and tunnel people.
right?
Right.
Just like you go into the city, do your thing, and then you come back out there. But like, yeah, sometimes
You still have that residue kind of on your, you still have that soot on your clothes. You still have like
Yeah.
that energy on you. And unless you have healthy outlets, right? Unless you have things that are going to allow you to lose that, you get stuck in that, and that's something that perpetuates, and you bring that into your home, and then you bring it into your life, and obviously that's where you help out guys,
Oh,
right?
100%.
You're
Yeah, I
a
was
mental
literally
health,
just saying that.
you're a mental health
Yeah.
counselor,
Mhm.
and you work primarily with men. I mean, you do
Yes.
work with some women, but your major focus is men.
Mhm.
What was that transition for you? How did you get into mental health counseling specifically for men?
So my like I'm always very open about the fact that I'm a person in long-term recovery, right? So like my journey into the mental health counseling area and like being a therapist itself like was not something that I'd planned, right? So like I went to school in Connecticut, a very like red-blooded business school. I did my undergraduate in finance, but I had like this existential crisis at the end of it to where I was like I was managing the energy sector of the student portfolio, and at the same time the BP oil spill happened, right? So like I was also like drinking and drugging, so like I wasn't really taking it seriously. I didn't do any internships. So then once I graduated, I like flew out to Vail, Colorado, and I worked on the mountain for like 18 months, 2 years.
What'd you do on the mountain?
I was in the back office like auditor. So they had like the fancy RFID passes for like the fancy Vail clientele. So when they got to the ski lift and scanned their pass, if there was a problem with it, they would contact Philly Fingers in the office. Because I'm a New Yorker, so I'm like just getting it done, right?
You're the guy from New York who gets it done, right? I got you.
That way they don't have to take their skis off and come into the pass office. But like I escaped out there because I didn't know my place in the world. I was drinking and drugging significantly. Like I really didn't want to take any like major responsibility. So like that was like my first like, okay, finance isn't my thing. I did a psych minor. Again, like we always joke around, people in the psychology field is like we do psychology to kind of find out holes about ourselves and like find out like, oh, maybe I can fix this on my own type of thing. But it was just like I didn't fall into this, right? Or excuse me, I didn't like purposefully go into this field. It kind of found me. So like throughout the years, going to treatment, getting out, relapsing, I went to Maine for sober living at one point, did a year of marine science at the local community college there, raised kelp in
That's
the
a very
ocean.
Maine thing to do.
Naturally, right? I mean, like it's I started to like buy guns and like flannels and like I was like working a decent program, but I like raised brown trout for the state of Maine to release into like rivers. I like worked in this like kelp processing plant, but also yeah, all like that normal because I'm a big outdoors guy.
Are you?
Right? Yeah, big outdoors guy. And that's why like I said, like, okay, I don't want to go to Wall Street, help like the rich get richer, and then like contribute to the planet being destroyed. I mean, I was kind of like more of an environmental guy than I've settled down.
Sure.
Right. But that's why I decided like, okay, I can't do this field of like business or finance or things. Cause I only reason I studied business was because that's what the men in my family did. Right. Like I was just perpetuating that role of what a man does and who a man is. Right. Cause I didn't really know exactly what that looked like. So I did that in Maine, crashed and burned there, came back to New York. Like what I mentioned, I worked as a florist. I worked as a plumber's apprentice for a while after Hurricane Sandy. And then like the final aspect of in October 2015, I crashed and burned for the last time with a hard relapse. And then I went to treatment in Pennsylvania, and then I got airmailed down to Florida. And then that's when I initially got sober. And that was the first time I ever worked a 12-step program. And then I, like most people do in Florida, because it's like the recovery capital of the world.
Is it?
I mean, it used to be, right? Then they started branching out to Arizona, California, Minnesota with Hazleton. There's a lot of other areas of the country that are like getting really big into the recovery hub type thing. But like back like maybe 8, 10, 15 years ago, there were treatment centers popping up everywhere. Right. And that's like where it was like the patient brokering and dirty, pill mills. And then the Florida government came into like they had the sober home task force, and they started to shut down a lot of like the bad places. But naturally in recovery, like there's so many treatment centers, you can get a job as like a behavioral health technician. So I got into like a really good facility that was really only males, and I started to work a strong program. I got moved from overnight shift to second to first shift, which is like 7 to 3. And I started to be exposed to some of the clinical work. And with like, it's just something that just like clicked with me, right? I'd always been like a really, kid with like really big feelings. And I got psychology. I got a lot of the spiritual aspects of it. So when I was working at this facility, the clinical staff recognized that in me and started to kind of like pull me in a little bit, right? And be like,
Sure.
hey, like we're doing this training, like, do you want to sit in on it, etc. And that's when I made the decision to go back and do my master's degree.
Beautiful.
So then when I did that, I was working in treatment full time, going to school full time, and really like clicked with me. I did really well in school, and it was just like I took to it like a fish with water.
Sure.
So then I worked in substance abuse and mental health for a number of years, and then this January will be 2 years that I've been running Dude Breathe counseling.
Awesome.
And when I decided to go into my private practice, being within the men's world and doing my own deeper work, I recognized that in that area, there was nobody focusing on men. Right. And I was like, wait a minute, this is not okay. Right. And I knew the statistics, I knew our journeys as men, and it was something that was so pivotal, because I firmly believe that if we focus on the pain of men, we reduce the stigma of pain of men, and we help make it more okay for them to talk about their feelings, their emotions, their difficulties. That'll be like a full real trickle down.
Yeah.
And we won't have a lot of the societal problems that we'll have overall, let alone the high rates of suicide in men, the substance abuse, the drug addiction, all of these issues. We make it okay for these guys to talk about the shit that they're going through.
Right.
So when I went into private practice, I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And it's been going from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot there that I think are all starting points, right? The first one I start with is that existential crisis at that kind of pivotal age.
That's exactly how I describe it.
Of, you want to call it, post college, 22, 23, 24, 25 years old, where you're mucking about still, but you're also trying to find your sea legs, right? You're still trying to figure out who and what you are in this world. And if you resort to the norms and expectations of culture, then you're going to default most likely to something that doesn't necessarily resonate with you on a deeper level. And that's not cultivated through school. No one teaches you that. Unfortunately, there are very little mentors in the world. We don't come from a culture of shamans where they're going to take you into the woods and
go through rituals.
Exactly. There's no initiation process for younger men at the age of, now there are some things in systems like church and things like that, but on a cultural sense, there's nothing for those guys that are transitioning into 24, 25, 26, who need to figure out who they are for this next chapter of life. And that's a huge thing that I think is missing from culture today.
Massive problem.
Yeah.
It's a massive problem, because certain cultures, right, they do have those things, right? Like in the country, Western, or like, people in the suburbs or rural areas, right? For some boys, shooting their first buck, right? Their first like kill, so to say, when they're out hunting, which is a massive component of a lot of those cultures. That is really a massive, like, you've seen Yellowstone?
I haven't.
Okay. So Yellowstone.
I started it with my wife, and we got like one episode in, and we both fell asleep on the couch. It's a cool show. Don't get me wrong.
It's real.
I've heard other great things, but it's just too much of a commitment.
The first time that I've seen something in popular culture, or like even in popular media, there was this thing where I think it's Kevin Costner is the grandfather, his son, and then his son's son.
The Native American boy.
Yes.
I did get connected with him on the episode.
So I forget his name. But
someone right now is watching, screaming at the screen. It's screaming, blah, blah, blah.
Right. I mean, it's one of the most popular shows in the past like 5-10 years. Right.
Fucking film.
Yeah. but they take the son hunting through, like, there's a lot of like chaos and turmoil in the family, but like part of the settling down is they take the son hunting. He pulls the trigger on his first kill, right? And as they're cleaning the buck, they take the first blood and they put it on his forehead, right? As this very metaphorical, mythological, symbolic gesture of, okay, now you're a man, right? So in today's society, there are a lot of things like that, right? In different families have different, what are they called? Rituals or, family heirloom type things that they'll do. But as a culture overall, we do not have anything like that.
We certainly don't have it in Long Island and Westchester and the Bronx. I mean, and that's a sad thing. And well, we shouldn't say that you don't. It's just not prioritized. It's not promoted. And it's most likely something that is not of altruistic endeavors, right? It's most likely something that's from culture. It's probably something negative, right? In my opinion,
it can be, right?
Yeah.
Or it's just not thought about in the fact that this is a major marker for this young man, right? This boy becoming a quote unquote man and seen from it as in that light, right? There might be things like, oh, we're going to take like, our first, we're going to go to the first Giants game or Jets game or something, but usually it happens a lot younger. Sure. It doesn't hold like that metaphorical symbolic weight to it. So it's just like a thing that they just do, right? It's really the intention behind it that is so vitally important, that, guys like Joseph Campbell, Robert Bly, right, John Wineland, all these greater like guys within the men's field have hammered for so long. But again, it's something that is still so significantly missing from our society. It's a travesty, really.
Yeah. And it's funny you say the word, it's a transitional stage to become a man, but you're still just a child, right? But it's what happens from then on out and the cultivation of that boy and really forming him into a man, where in our culture, we have the exact opposite. We have a lot of grown men bodies, but little boys inside who
100%.
haven't cultivated that.
It's the arrested development, right? I'm working with guys who are these very successful entrepreneurs, right? They'll pull in the parking lot, park the Rolls, have the $120,000 Rolex on their wrist, but then they come in and sit down on my couch. They're a 14-year-old, right? Emotionally. Right? Because these are things that we are not taught, right? And it's the same idea with my existential crisis at like 22, 23, that like I had strong male figures in my life, right? I had a lot of uncles. My father was there. My father was there physically. He wasn't really there emotionally for me. That's not his fault.
Sure.
Right? I mean, I was resentful for him for years because of that. But it's this idea is that like, okay, my father is the product of his father's generation. My grandfather is the product of his father's generation, right? And then, of course, like I forget who talks about it in their book, but it's like that father wound. If we go back blaming, we're going to be going back to the beginning of time.
Hope you are enjoying the show. If you are, do me a favor, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast wherever you're getting it. iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube. It is greatly appreciated.
And it took me a long time to realize that my father was human, was not the superhuman, nor did he really have the tools that I needed as a young boy who was sensitive, who was not the star athlete the way that he was, who was not raised with 4 or 5 brothers the way that he was. So like he didn't really know what to do with me. Right. And I remember my mother saying, Bruce, he's not you. Right. Because he didn't know what to do with me. Right. I was short for my age. I was really sensitive, and I was getting this message from the women in my family, right, that feelings are okay to express them. And then from like my father not being there emotionally with me, not really knowing what to do, but then also the societal expectations of what we call the boy box.
Sure.
Which was originally David and Brannon in the 70s, and then expanded on by Ron Levant. These are the triple OG clinicians of like the men's world and research.
Sure.
That like this boy box is, as Liz Plank says, she wrote a great book called For the Love of Men. She's like a hardcore feminist. Called It's Written Nowhere, but Understood Universally, that boys need to be assertive, strong, stoic, show no emotion, vulnerability whatsoever. Right. We need to be able to solve our own problems, and God forbid we express any emotion whatsoever. Right. be labeled as a girl, right? Or other terms I'm not going to say right now, but
Sure.
we all can know what they are,
Right.
right? Because if I express these things and I do and perceived as feminine, not sexual, not gender, but just what energetically feminine, right? I will be ostracized, pushed out of that boy box. And then if we go to the sociological idea, if I'm not part of the tribe, if I'm not part of the crew, then I'm outside of it and I don't get fed. I'm not safe. But then by and large, if I'm deemed at the bottom of the pack, I'm not going to be chosen to pass on my genetic material. So as boys, we're not thinking about that consciously, right? I mean, we're fucking terrified of girls, right? We hold their hands and, you know, something happens.
Your hands start sweating, you're climbing up. Yeah.
But like at a deep genetic level, right, that's something that is registering there. But you're right? That was the existential crisis that I had. And I had no one to guide me through that. Being raised like the drugs and alcohol and playing music and guitar and stuff, what I thought a man was fucking Slash.
Right.
John Frusciante, who's shooting heroin, every day for like 5 or 6 years, still wears long sleeves because of his track marks. Jimmy Page, right? Dwayne Allman, right? All these like guys who I was like, oh, music, drugs and alcohol, money and power, etc. That's what it means to be a quote unquote man. Right. But then I realized that there was something was not congruent inside of me. Something wasn't right. And that's why the whole idea is that I had that existential crisis of like, oh, maybe I don't have to be a successful businessman, right? My personality isn't mesh well putting on a suit and tie every day and then going in and working 60, 70 hours a week. That's not me, right? But that clashed so significantly with the norms of our society and what a man is supposed to be. I had no fucking clue what to do. So I ran to a ski resort.
Which is not a bad place to run.
No, it's a great place, right? But ultimately, it's like, what the fuck, right? I was running for myself,
right?
There's a phrase we have in the 12-step rooms, which is like, anywhere I go, there I am. So, of course, the geographic change can be beneficial.
Sure.
Right?
You're getting away from the area and the people that would rope you back into that way of life.
Right.
So to remove yourself fully, there was a benefit to up and leaving.
Sure.
But you can't run from yourself, right?
No, it's that internal work that is so desperately needed, is that all these guys make these large physical changes in their life, right? Like jobs, geographic, whatever it might be, but then they still have those voids and emptiness inside.
Well, even the body itself, the body, I remember when I was in some of the best shape of my life, I was the angriest version of myself.
Right.
Like I was lifting to Slipknot. You know what I mean? And I'm not against it.
Yep.
And it served me, right?
Right.
But I didn't know how to alchemize that energy. And it was only built off of just, piss and vinegar, right?
Of course.
So I didn't know how to fuel that. I want to go back to something you said in regards to, the father wound. A buddy of mine, Mikey Brackett, he runs a program that I actually just finished up a few weeks ago, which is called Healing the Father Wound. And it's really
is he the one out in Colorado?
Yes.
Yeah. His wife and I think Nadia.
Yes.
Yeah, I met them randomly.
Did you?
My buddy Philly Mack, who I grew up in high school with, he moved out to Colorado and we went to took his dog to a dog park. He's like, oh, these are my friends. They're psychotherapists too. And I linked up with them and I was like, oh shit, this is awesome.
He's a great guy.
Yeah.
We're going to do a whole series on the Jungian archetypes.
Love that.
Yeah.
The king, warrior, magician.
Exactly.
Exactly.
I love it. But he has a whole program called Healing the Father Wound. And it is that reverse engineering process of who you are. And I've done it before, going into the program and looking at your father and looking at your mother and seeing where they came from.
Yep.
And that's such a useful tool in any interaction that you're having with someone, because you truly don't know where they're coming from. You don't know what situation they're walking out of and walking into. And although they may come off as an asshole, this person's a fucking dick, or any of these things, you don't know what's happening behind their eyes.
Right.
And it really is about going back in your own life and being able to see the God within them, the Jesus Christ within them, whatever term you want to use, but seeing yourself in that person that allows you to have that empathetic feel towards them, that allows you to move forward.
Hurt people.
Yeah.
Right. The whole idea. Right. And I'm actually, because the big next training I'm doing is that I'm doing John Weiland's Emergent Masculine Leadership Program. Right. It's like a 6-month thing. Just past the interview process. I'm stoked, but I'm part of me is like terrified.
Yeah.
Right. Just because like, oh shit. Right. And like now I'm gonna have to do like, because I've done a lot of work in therapy, I've done a lot of personal development stuff, but like being 8 years sober and clean, running my own business, you know, with like the relationships and like me still choosing partners that aren't good for me or ignoring red flags and like all that stuff is like, oh man, I still got a lot of work to do. Right. But that one of the things I'm also doing is I'm reading Connor Beaton's book, Men's Work.
Okay.
And then like the second or third chapter, right, he has like reflection things every single time. And it was like male isolation. Okay, yep, I know isolation versus solitude, et cetera, et cetera. And then it's like the father wound. And I'm like, oh, I gotta go with this again. Right. I literally like I'm doing this outline on Microsoft Word that's like password protected because it's like all my shadow, like the deepest, darkest parts of myself. And I literally like wrote like, you know, the father wound, ... And then like in parentheses, like, here we go.
Yeah.
Right. And then going into that and like recognizing the pain of the father, recognizing that they're not superhuman, that they have their own story and that their own, you know, their own humanity aspects of like letting go of these expectations. But I was talking to, it's weird, right? Because like throughout my psychotherapy that I provide to the guys, there are these like cycles I see. And I don't know if it's my own personal bias, or like energetically in the universe, but I'll sometimes have the same conversation with like 3 or 4 guys in 1 week to where, oh, this is a father week. Right. And like, no matter what I'm talking about, whatever problems that these guys are having, right, it comes down to like, oh, this is going to be father stuff. And as I'm going through this myself, I'm talking to these guys about it. And it's like, one of the big things I talked about last week was like, where was your father's pain? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And some of my guys are still so resentful and so angry at the fact that their fathers were not able to provide to them exactly what they needed, that it's still really difficult for them to recognize the fact that they were actually a human being with their own crosses to bear. So it's that process of going into it. But I think part of that process of looking at the father wound and looking into the anger and the resentment and almost sometimes the hatred for the father is also a grieving process. Because as they look into that pain of the father, they have to really just identify the fact that, oh, my dad was not able to provide me what I needed. I'm going to have to provide that to myself now through, like with me, it's like the PMLD inner child work and doing some internal family system stuff, depending on who it is. And then for like, okay, how do I provide these needs to myself now, but still also love this man who they can recognize. Some guys didn't try their best. Some fathers did try their best, but then also looking at that as sometimes we return to the father in the 40s and 50s because we're more mature. And then there's that role reversal of like, oh shit, now I got to caretake. But then also how these guys with their father issues, well, then how the fuck do I parent my kids? How do I break this cycle? Right. And one of the things I tell guys, and it seems somewhat of a cop out, but I'm like, dude, just the fact that you're sitting here in therapy with me as a man asking these questions, you don't have to have all the answers. Just the fact that you're fucking asking those questions, you've already broken the chain. You may not know exactly what to do, how to raise them, et cetera, but just the fact that you were asking these questions and trying, you're already doing the work. Right. But as men, we want answer, outline, outline. Yeah. And it just doesn't work that way.
It certainly doesn't. And it goes back to the idea of, and you had mentioned it, like the man that it's kind of stuck in that space, that energetic space. And there's the flying boy that never grows up, the Peter Pan, right?
Yep.
And you could be two men. You could be this hyper productive guy that's, you know, super successful and business oriented, or you could be the stoner on the couch who just never grows up, and there's nothing wrong with smoking weed. There's nothing wrong, you know, with playing video games. There's nothing wrong with subscribing to those things. But when that is all you do, when you identify only in those things and you don't break outside that mold, that's where you're still, whether you be super successful, right, and you drive the car and you have the watch and you have the house, or you're still in your parents' basement with Cheetos on your fingers, smoking weed, you're the same person.
Right.
You're the yin and the yang of the same energetic.
Right.
You're the same person. And that's where it's hard to navigate. It's hard to kind of be like, do I have to be this super successful guy, or can I just be this guy who's just going with the flow? Or, how do you help guys with kind of guiding that energy?
You're right, because it is the opposites. But the guy who has the car, the wife, the watch, the vacations, whatever social media thing we're putting out there to tailor this beautiful life, right? Society's gonna look at that guy. Oh no, he's better than, right?
Correct.
He's better than that guy who's failure to launch, who's still in the basement smoking weed, or like, My Little Pony, like whatever the fuck it is, right?
Right.
It doesn't matter, right? Whatever butters your muffin, let it butter your muffin. But it comes down to this idea of balance, right? Because we could be really imbalanced. Like the pendulum can swing two separate ways, right? We can either be very black, so to say, with like the career, the job, et cetera, driven that way, or very white, so to say, on the other side where we're not doing anything. But it really comes down to guiding these guys to identify what needs are not being met for them in their lives. So the big thing is, like, if this guy is, driving his life towards success and power and money, right? He may not be seen. He may not feel heard. He might just be driven by this whole idea of these expectations for what it means in society, as opposed to actually doing what he really wants.
Hey guys, just want to take a quick break from the podcast to talk about something I'm super passionate about, and that is men's mental health. For those of you who may not know, I am a certified life coach, but I prefer the term journeyman for hire. And 4 years ago, I started the Council of Dudes, a men's group that has monthly meetings to lean on each other, to have open and honest conversations, to build community. So if you're a guy and you're looking to find like-minded individuals to help you see your blind spots and point out some insights and perspectives they may have in their own life, head on over to vinnybrusco.com, click the Council of Dudes banner, and sign up and join the council.
Right? Or the other guy is doing exactly what he wants, but not also rising to the occasion of what it means to be a quote unquote like good man, right? There was this guy, I forget his name, maybe it was Skinner. This is part of my big 3-hour presentation I did for Lynn University a few months ago on like men's issues, but it was mostly for clinicians about how we can approach men from a much more culturally competent standpoint. But they took one population and study group of men, and they asked them, what are the components of a quote unquote real man versus what a good man was, right? In the same group of participants, in the same questionnaire, real men are strong, stoic, aggressive or assertive, driven, successful, it really came down to like get laid, make money, right?
Conditions,
right?
All conditional things.
Right. Of course. And that's the way that most, like the way that we are raised as men is to get our self-esteem externally. Mm-hmm. It's either performance-based, attribute-based, or others-based. All external factors, yep. Right? Outside in. But we know that real self-esteem is inside out, right? So we are taught, again, the same thing like you mentioned with the lifting, just grunting out squats to Slipknot, right? We are taught that if we do not have a specific body, if we do not look a specific way, right, I will not be loved from outside.
Well, think about from the and the women's perspective is, well, Barbie is a standard that no woman could live up to. It's like, mm-hmm. Look at fucking He-Man.
Exactly.
Right? Look at G.I. Joe.
Right.
He's called fucking Superman. Okay. So grow up with those action figures in your toy box, grow up with those comic books in your shelf, yep. And grow up with those things on your television. And how could you not have men who mm-hmm. are empty inside, who are only looking to achieve this aesthetic or this car or all these external validation pieces,
right.
Versus finding the Superman within, not to be cheesy,
no,
but then moving from the inside out.
Because we've never taught to go inside out. Right. We were taught to cleave off anything that can be perceived as feminine, right? Terry Real, who's a big guy in the men's field, he's something called relational life therapy, right? And he's identifies as a recovering narcissist. I've done a couple of his trainings, but he calls it the great cleaving, the great divide, right? Which is like a big circle. And there's a line down the middle. One side is masculine things, the other side is feminine, right? So that's the masculine side, is that boy code that I mentioned earlier, which is the strong, assertive, solve all of our problems, not showing any emotion. But anything that can be perceived as feminine, right, in characteristics or personality wise, such as vulnerability, softness, everything else, we're taught to cleave all that off, right? So the thing is that, like, if we look at, like bodybuilding, right, it is a perfect example of hyper masculinity. Now, there's nothing wrong with being yoked, right? I just started lifting again myself because I want to get big too, right?
Sure.
But the thing is that I'm not doing it because if I don't have a six pack, I'm not good enough. No, I want to be fit, right? Because my body mass and my muscle mass now is going to translate 30, 40 years from now of me living on my own. Now, of course, I want to look good and feel good, right? But it's not to the point where if my shoulders or my biceps do not match a specific measurement, then I will not be good enough. I already feel good enough, but I want to be better, right? Because the whole thing is that, again, it's that emptiness outside of it. If we look at guys like on steroids and everything else, that's not for women. That's for other men, right? That's
100%.
That's them asserting their masculinity of like this hyper masculinity, which is really a lie, right? Those guys with those overly, monster muscles,
Right.
et cetera, they are selling a false sense of goods to females, right? Or other men, right? That, hey, I have this masculinity that you're looking for. But then when they're actually pulled into the relationship, they're missing all of those other characteristics that our partners really want from us.
Well, it's a billboard, right?
Yes.
It's a billboard of the self. And if the product behind the billboard isn't of quality, it's going to come through, right? Yeah. And that's where it is. It's the mind, body, spirit. When you feel so good inside, you can't help but want to have a body that can harness that spirit, that can harness that energy.
Yes.
And if you are, you could have a fat Buddha, don't get me wrong.
Sure.
But it's almost like this energy's inside you, and you have to get it out of you and express it in a way that the outside world can see you, which is such a huge thing that I want to talk about, where the outside world can see you, for the billboard, but know that what's behind that is of quality.
It's the concept that Michael Glover, who's this great book called No More Mr. Nice Guy, about nice guy syndrome, right? The sensitive new guy syndrome, right? He calls it the integrated male, right? Trevor Bain calls it the uncivilized male, right? There's also this massive movement towards mindful masculinity. It doesn't really matter what we call it, because right now we really do not have a really good or cohesive model as an answer to this, as most people will know it as toxic masculinity. I don't like that phrase because nobody wants to fucking be labeled toxic. Right. So us in the men's world, we like to use the term problematic masculinity, right? Because masculinity in itself is not a bad thing, right? We need it,
of course,
right? To the point where if a man is not in his masculine place, it forces his female partner to be in her masculine, and she will fucking resent him for it.
Sure.
Right. There's this little snippet in Man Uncivilized by Trevor Bain where he talks about how one of his clients that he worked in his coaching thing, like 3 years, he said no to his wife, and his hand was shaking, right? And they went to dinner later that week, and she said, for the first time in 3 years, I can trust you, right? I can respect you because you finally stood up for yourself. You set this boundary, etc., right? To be in that masculine energy. So it doesn't matter, like you said, whether it's video games or, the working or anything else like that, or the success. It's about the balance in between of really identifying which needs are being met for you and which ones are not, right? Like I have a lot of guys that I'll work with that are much more on and I work with both sides, failure to launch, as well as these guys who are like hyper successful, but then have completely empty relationships, is running through Tinder or Bumble or Hinge, just trying to go for the 9s and the 10s.
Sure.
Right. Like personally, right, I can meet a woman who, as her societal standards, right, meets a 9 out of a 10 scale on beauty or whatever, body image or whatever else like that. But if she doesn't have the mind behind it or personality, like kick rock, sister, right? Sure. I want nothing to do with that.
Right.
Right. Even for most of my life. Right. I need something more.
Substance.
I need substance. Right. Because me being myself, I know that if there's no personality, if I don't have that chick is going to stick her finger in my face, be like, no, I'm not okay with that. I'm going to end up steamrolling.
Sure.
Right. Like I will be much too strong in my masculine. So I need that sacred, divine balance of the masculine and feminine, or else like I'm not going to be happy and I'm going to get bored.
Sure.
Right. I forgot the original question.
That's okay. I want to go back to the survey that they conducted, a good man versus.
Oh, yes.
I want to go back to that. Yeah.
So the real, quote unquote, real man was like the toxic or problematic masculinity.
Sure.
A good man, the same group of guys said honest, integrity, helping out the little guy, sacrifice, right? All of these other characteristics of what a quote unquote good man is. I'm a firm believer that a lot of my guys that I work with want to be good men. They really, really do. But it's not safe for them to be good men. It's not safe in society, even in some of their relationships, to be that sensitive, vulnerable self, because we're actually being policed by society and the world around us. So there's so much more pressure, and it's so much easier for us to stay in that quote unquote what a real man is, as opposed to take the risk and really go into that good man space. Because a good man is going to be channeling a lot more of those feminine characteristics of softness, of vulnerability, of expression, right? Of allowing our pain to come up, allowing ourselves to experience those true, real human emotions. But that's going to leave us vulnerable. And we've been taught our entire lives that vulnerability is synonymous with weakness. If I'm vulnerable, right? Let's say for some reason we get into some heavy shit here in the pod, right? And I start to tear up and cry, right? There's still, even though I've done so much work, there's still going to be this little piece of coding, this little piece of conditioning saying, should have cried in that podcast. Yeah, right? Like, oh man, like that. What's going on? But then I still, even after all these years and being a men's issues expert and speaking about this and being on so many podcasts talking about these things, there's still that little piece inside of me that's like, no, that wasn't okay. But then I have to talk myself through it and be like, no, that's me. That's authentic. I'm safe to do that.
Two things coming up for me.
Yep.
One, I think that from my experience, that changes with having children.
Mm-hmm.
I cry at everything.
Yeah, right.
And I am unapologetic about it.
Look,
I can cry right now.
Be unapologetically masculine.
I cry on the way to school. I cried 3 times on Wednesday before I even got to work. And I told my wife and my mother, I was like, I was talking to my mom.
I'm so happy to hear
and she's
that.
like, we're talking. She's like, oh, what's going on? I was like, I just cried 3 times. She's like, what? I told my wife the other day, I was like, she's like, why did you cry? I was like, well, I dropped off Emma and I saw a big book bag and she's walking into school. And then I was explaining a song to Vincent. I was crying. And then he helped a little boy walk into the classroom. And I cried 3 times before I even got to it. I cried between the hour of 8 to 9 o'clock. I cried 3 times.
Fucking run
and
it.
I don't care.
No, yeah,
I don't care because I want my son. I've seen my dad cry so many times.
That's lucky. It's a lot of guys.
It's beautiful. He's a veteran, so that stuff really hits him. And I've seen it, and it's a beautiful thing to witness. Mm-hmm. So I have no problem crying in front of my children. Beautiful. I don't care. I'm like, cry with me. Let's go. Yep. It's good laughs and good cries are rejuvenating.
It's the full spectrum of our humanity.
It's beautiful for the soul needs it. Yes. The soul needs it.
Yes.
And to hold that back. I mean, I'm literally holding it back. Like, I gotta just hold, like, get it together, man.
Depends on the situation. Depends on the context.
Of course. But it's a beautiful thing. And the other thing I want to bring up is you say the word balance. And I think that's a really tough word to wrestle with.
Brutal.
Because what is balance? And then my mind would always transition to, well, I don't want to be balanced. I want to be harmonious. And then I was listening to I was reading Iron John, and he talks about, in the book, I'm going to paraphrase, he talks about how living a harmonious life is like having a child's dream. Like, it doesn't fucking exist. To say I want to be a balanced person or I want to live in a harmonious life, it's not reality. There is no balance. It's always going to be ebbs and flows and the dark and the light.
Like Bruce Lee said, to be like water.
Exactly.
Yes.
And it's going to be the Jedis and the Siths. It's always going to be the two always need each other. They need each other to exist, because without the day, you don't have the light.
Well, that's the same thing with us as men. We need to integrate that shadow side, right? Like the idea is that, like, if we don't bring in that dark side of ourselves and just try to live only in the light, we're not going to be able to integrate both sides of ourselves, but then also just to live this harmonious, balanced life. Because the thing is that you're right. It's always that ebb and flow. We could never be only on one side. One of my guiding values in my life is always going to be growth. I will never be done, right? If I make it to 80, 85, I will never be done growing or working on myself. And I'm okay with that, because every day it's like the idea of Kaizen, just 1% better each day. Just try to tweak it. So when I actually eventually crack these fucking guys I'm working with, right? Because it takes some time, right? Some guys come in, they're already broken. House is burning down. Sometimes most of the time guys are coming into therapy like, hey, I need help with my professional life. And like they come in the door that way. But then we start identifying a trickle in this. I was like, oh, tell me about dad, mom, and this and that. And then over time,
that could be a turnoff too.
Yes.
That could be if you go into, like, not to control, but if you go into that world too quickly,
yes.
like off the jump, it's like, you know what, work's a little tough. Like, tell me about your father.
No. There's the thing.
Like, yep. What? This isn't about my dad. It's like, you don't know that. It is, but we'll get there.
I clocked you at 20 minutes in, dude. Right. But the whole idea is like I have to pace and lead them appropriately.
Of course.
So I have to suss out and go into it a little bit. Right. But one of the biggest things that I do out the gate is I really try to install this idea of emotional intelligence in them, which is because we have never gotten that before. Right. We are taught our entire life to just cleave off emotion and feeling, where with girls after the age of 6, they continue on to grow. With their smaller groups on the playgrounds, much more intimate, emotional type play. Boys were in larger groups, competitive sports, etc. Right. So the idea is that like, as when I start to get guys to that place, and some guys it's quicker, some guys takes a hell of a lot longer. Right. The pendulum and that balance idea will swing the other way. Well, they will call me midweek and be like, dude, I'm fucking cracked open. Right. And I'm like, okay, that's okay. Right. Allow those emotions and feelings to come up in you. But one of the biggest aspects of that is not judging themselves for it, right? To where it's like, yeah, they're all right. They'll be sitting in work or anything else like that. And the emotion will just creep out. Okay. Remember, then I prompt them out the gate. I'm like, listen, dude, this is going to get fucking weird, right? You're going to experience a lot of things you've been holding in for a long time. There's going to be this period, couple weeks, where anything is just going to hit you. Right, you're on Instagram and you see like the soldier coming home and being reunited with his family. Or for me, because I'm single, no kids.
Yeah,
right. But like my hormones, like my dad stuff is triggered. Like my sister's had a kid. I'm holding the kid. I'm like, I was holding her last night. They were all like finishing a little Christmas project that my sister. They're very festive. And I'm holding this child, and I'm like, she's gonna go to school. She's gonna go fucking like her heartbreak and life and everything else like that. And like this caveman, like protective, like thing came out in me, right? And I was like going through that. And whereas like for me, the biggest thing, like it used to be the soldiers coming home, being right now with their dogs and their families. Now there's times where if I'm in my feels and really want to get something out on my couch, I'll go watch pregnancy announcements where the female will go to the boyfriend or the fiance or the father and like hand him the pictures or some shit.
Yeah.
And their emotion, like it's coming up. I'm getting goosebumps a little bit, right?
Beautiful.
Like that is something at my deepest core level that I want so fucking desperately that it just hits me at that level. Yeah. Right. But again, it's the integration of that side that we've been taught to cleave off completely. And sometimes that overwhelms, especially if these guys have been shoving this down for so long. They will become irritable, like restless, discontented. They'll become somewhat aggressive at times. So it's really about normalizing what that looks like for them to actually access in this emotional side, because sometimes it can be so overwhelming, or they start to experience it and then fall back on that classical conditioning of shut it down. Right. I'm just going to go lift this. I'm going to go box this out. Right. Some guys, if they have some unhealthy mechanisms, they'll message girls on Instagram, or they'll get on Tinder, right? They'll cheat on their partners. They'll gamble. They'll drink more heavily, whatever it might be. So it's like, I really have to be aware of like, okay, if this guy starts to crack open, one, is it safe for me to go there with him? Two, I have to ask myself as a clinician, does this guy have the healthy amount of coping mechanisms necessary so he doesn't fucking burn his life down? Right. And then three, talk to them and understand. And really like a big aspect of the work that I do is explain to guys why we're doing things.
Sure.
And like the logic behind it. So they have an understanding of like, okay, well, Phil's going to ask me to do this really woo-woo-y fucking inner child work.
Right.
Right. I need them to have an understanding of why they're doing it. Right. And then that integration, that harmonious aspect of pulling out these parts that they've been shoving down. But yeah, it gets gnarly sometimes.
Do you find any specific therapy that's most effective, whether it be like Gestalt therapy, humanistic approach, CBT? Is there anything that really works well with men?
Yes. I mean, most of them are really going to work well. It's just about actually, that's the thing in my training that I'm starting to develop for clinicians. And when I do like my larger talks, is that I'm not there to tell them what's going to work and what's not going to work. Right. A lot of these clinicians have been doing this a hell of a lot fucking longer than I have. Right. So I'm not going to try to patronize or talk down to them and be like, oh, yeah, what you're doing is not working. Who am I to say that?
Sure.
Right. It's really about having the underlying understanding of how to approach men, the specific clinical components that we do have, like masculine gender role stress, gender role strain, normative male alexithymia, right? All like the boy code, our developmental and societal expectations on us. Having a really firm understanding of what those things are and then integrating those things into whatever their approach is really great. Now, homework and being that logical approach is extremely important for guys. So CBT is always going to be a gold standard.
Sure.
That's a big one, right? Yep. The psychoeducation aspect behind actual homework assignments. So even if you're doing something woo-wooey like somatic experiencing, which is helping guys tap into their physical sensations in their body and being right, getting okay with them or allowing these things to express, you need to give these guys assignments to do this when things are okay, so they get integrated into it, right? But things like EMDR, great, right? REBT, great. I mean, even things like DBT, which is, you know, created by Marsha Linehan specifically for like borderline personality disorder, right? These things are all great because there's a lot of skill building. But the same thing is like whatever the approach is, I think can be really beneficial for men. It's just about how you're doing it. Yeah. Right. So I'm not trying to reinvent the world. I'm not trying to become famous from creating my own therapy or anything else like that. My goal is just to provide clinicians with the proper information so that whatever approach that they have, whether it's like trauma-based stuff in EMDR, I don't give a shit. As long as you're approaching it from a culturally competent standpoint, and just applying that knowledge to be able to actually approach these guys and guide them much more effectively, but also from a culturally competent standpoint, because they don't teach us how to approach men in school.
Well, I think you're seeing a big shift in therapy and psychology, and people are getting away from the traditional mold of what a therapist is. And I think that's a big part of just the culture itself, realizing that everyone's just not a data point, right? Yes. You know, and obviously Jung was a big advocate of like the shadow, right? Deeper part of, he invented it essentially,
traditional insight-based psychotherapy.
Exactly.
It's mostly my approach.
Exactly.
With my guys.
And going deeper and going to the next level and going to the depth, and then pulling out whatever's deep within inside and allowing that to come out, right? And then you integrate the golden shadow and the golden thread, which has been my own personal journey. And then you have the things like Viktor Frankl with logotherapy, and really that's
logotherapy guy. That's a huge logotherapy guy.
Yeah, I love it.
The myth and the meaning behind all this, right? I mean, that's like a big root for my own recovery, right? There was meaning to my suffering. The thing is that like, what does that mean? How do we apply these things? So if you actually look at logotherapy, like The Will to Meaning, like Viktor wrote a lot of great books, but there are like almost fucking no interventions, right? Besides, like, I mean, what is it? A paradoxical intention, right? Okay, you're having panic attacks. Good. As soon as you leave my office, I want you to implode. I want you to have the biggest, widowmaker panic attack that you possibly can have. And then clients would realize, like, oh, I can't actually induce that in myself. Or they do, then they learn to actually, it's
like overexposure therapy.
Right. It's like ERP or whatever it is like that, right? But the thing is that, like, for my approach is that I go very mythological, meaning insight-based. But with a lot of men, how the fuck do we apply this to our normal day life? Right? That's the thing, is like, whatever the approach is, whatever theoretical orientation you have, great. We just have to learn to, like, okay, if you're doing like deep psychotherapeutic, like insight-based stuff, right? Okay, or like inner child stuff, and we're learning a lot there. How do we actually apply that to their daily life so it can become integrated? Right. So one of the things that I'll do is that, like, I'll do inner child visualizations with these guys. I'll have them go back and co-parent or reparent, but then on a daily basis, how do they continue that? So like one of the biggest questions that I ask my guys to ask them once we start the inner child stuff, or is like a scanner to identify specific stuck points when they were younger, right? If your boss comes over to you and starts giving you shit for something, I want you to ask yourself, how old do I feel in that moment? Right. Okay. right? My boss comes over, starts yelling at me, or I fuck something up at work and I feel shame and hurt and less than feeling. Okay, I'm feeling 10, 11. And if that consistent pattern comes up, right, then we come back into the therapeutic space. Like, all right, let's go back and talk to that 10-year, 11-year-old. What did he need? What was happening for them there?
That is one of the biggest shifts that I've had in my personal journey, was going back to the version of me that's energetically stuck, that's now making a decision as a almost 40-year-old man who's I'm making decisions in my current state based off of a previous emotional state.
Yep.
And now giving that child or that teenager or that version of me what they needed at that time.
Yes.
And now being able to integrate moments that, I hate the word trigger, but now trigger that version of me and say, here's that thing coming up again in this new way.
Yep.
How do I now move forward from being that child again?
Right.
And such a huge part of being a father is, you know, we talk about the emotional state that your father provided, my father provided. A huge role of the father, I think the primary role of the father, and I've heard this before, is to see the child. It is to see the child, not yes, to cultivate and to push and to kind of test the ropes, but to truly see the child. The mother sees the child. The mother held the child, birthed the child, right? Created the child. So how could she not see them? It's unconditional in most cases.
Yes.
And it's innate. For the father, it's a completely different relationship. So to see your child allows them to feel fully immersed in who they are. You're good, man. Don't worry about it. It's okay. You dropped something. We're okay. Is for them to feel okay for who they are moving forward. But so many people get stuck in that energetic space of a child that they're not able to move forward. And when things do come up that trigger them, they resort back to those tendencies in that emotional state.
And it's absolutely brutal, right? To be in that kind of that experience of, I'm different, I'm going through something, and then just to have that cookie cutter or whatever idea just placed onto you is like, no, men do this, right? Men do that. Like, you're gonna play sports.
You don't even hear that,
right?
Or nothing.
Or the thing is, or the kid expresses that they don't want to do something, but no, like, this is what we're doing.
Yeah,
like, you're not going to be a quitter,
oh,
right? Or whatever that is. But you're right, because the whole idea is that with that emotional intelligent aspect of it, most men were never given that. So we don't operate from that standpoint, nor can we identify or empathize whatever young children are actually experiencing. But the thing is, like, we actually, through our parenting, and again, like I always preface, when I talk about the parenting stuff, I am not a father, right? I do not have children, right? So the same thing is, like, I can't say that I understand, but I can say from like a professional standpoint of what I know, what we can provide our young boys and our young girls, right? To help them understand exactly and having a different experience going forward with it, right? Of like showing, right? You see like the stuff on Instagram, right? It's like, exposing, like, it's like a big father weightlifting, like she's in the garage as he's doing like,
sure, yeah,
350 pound, deadlifts in the garage.
He's like doing a little squat or something.
Right. Like, I'm
adorable.
showing her what like a man looks like, so she doesn't, when you swing your kettlebells. I'm a kettlebell guy, right?
Yeah.
But they're looked up down upon in the weightlifting community.
Are they?
Right? Yeah. It's like, it's just move real iron kind of thing.
I love kettlebells.
Yeah, me too. It's one of my main training components.
I love it. A good old Russian kettlebell swing.
Yeah,
probably not the one you want to be doing nowadays, but a good kettlebell swing. We'll go with that one.
Single snatches. Turkish get up.
Give me a good Turkish get up any day of the week.
I go into a gym and sometimes I'll do the Turkish get ups, but like I'll do traditional weightlifting as well. But it's like I'll get like some looks of the guys with weight belts on, just deadlifting, like doing the compound movements. It's like, oh, actually, I want full functional, type stuff.
Yeah.
But it's this idea that like, oh, I'm gonna show my daughter or my son what a real man looks like. So when you come along, like, she's not going to love like your dusty ass shit or whatever else. I'm paraphrasing terribly.
Right.
But the idea is right, like, the way that we hold ourselves as men and break these chains is going to, again, show our young daughters and our young sons, or however they want to identify, right, what their goal can be in the future, right? Because the thing is that, like, again, like, it's very cliche, it's whatever, right? Women are going to move towards men who appear to be their husbands or complete opposite, or their fathers, and women are going to move towards their mothers in some capacity, right?
Men are going to move towards their mothers.
men are going to move towards dating women similar to their mothers,
Right.
Which is whatever, right? It's cliche as shit, but
is it true? Is that like
you will see patterns.
I think on like on a soul level, probably
we repeat what we know, right? Like there's a
why
thing
wouldn't you?
Right. I mean, that's the only thing that we know, right? So the whole idea is that, you know, when I work with guys and their fathers were, you know, alcoholics or, you know, not really there for mom or taught mom in a specific way or whatever else like that, right? They will unconsciously be repeating these same relationship dynamics with all of their female partners, right? And again, it's not to blame the father for this, but like one of the biggest things that Terry Real says is like, fuck, dude, you didn't stand a chance. You were set up to be this way, right? You're a good man you're a decent man who's been acting indecently. Let me help guide you to being something different, right? So I'll see guys that like they will literally be in relationship after relationship after relationship, just mimicking the same patterns that were modeled for them as kids, right? Like if their parents like, you know, got married and divorced a couple times on either sides in different relationships, I will work with guys who then they're not able to commit in relationships. They're not able to provide their partner what they need, and they just keep repeating what we know, right? And it's the same thing within ourselves, right? Like some guys were raised with alcoholic fathers and they're sober, or they're able to moderate, or, you know, like some of us, we try everything in our capacity to be not like mom or dad, right? But then we become the drug addict and alcoholic anyway.
Sure.
Right. But we're still different.
Yeah.
So to say. So we're going to repeat what we know until we break that chain. And you don't need a therapist to break that chain.
Right.
Right. We're going to fucking help.
Right.
Right.
You're going to guide through
it. I advise it.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
It might move the process along in a more adaptable way, right?
And that's one of the biggest things I tell my guys.
Yeah.
I'm like, listen, man, like my job is not to have you on my couch for 2 or 3 years, right? My job is to work myself out of a job, right? I have enough fucking business.
God bless you. Right.
Yeah, business is great, right?
Yeah.
I just hired a couples counselor. I'm going to be expanding again in the new year, right? My goal, and this is how I break the tension on the phone call, because guys usually are calling me, hey, dude, like I've had your, you know, my chick sent me your Instagram, because my Instagram at Dude Breathe Counseling. I've seen your videos, dude. You're like, because I show up the same way, right? Got my necklaces, my tattoos, my beard. I'm cursing. Like I'm not an old stuffy dude in a jacket and a coat taking notes, and you're facing away from me. Right. We're busting balls. We're chopping it up in session. I tell them on the phone, my job is for, you know, you to do the work necessary. I'm going to guide you along that path. I'm not going to do it for you. Right. So then you can spread your beautiful little butterfly wings and fly away. Right. And then I crack the joke, and then you tell all your friends how amazing of a therapist I am. And then you continue to keep sending guys my way.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That's the system.
Right. But this thing, it's short term.
Right.
Like a lot of guys I work with, like 3 to 6 months, and then go fucking live your life.
Right.
Go do this.
Right.
Right.
Act.
Yes.
Take action.
Yes.
I have my coaching certification, and I never liked the term life coach. I never liked it. It's too grandiose. It's too pompous. It just doesn't work for me.
I have very specific opinions.
No, yeah, absolutely.
Life coaches.
And so I always went by the term journeyman for hire.
Cool.
Because I'm not here to tell you how to live your life.
I'm with that.
We're gonna walk the trail. You're gonna go into the cave. I'm gonna be outside with the honey mead and the snacks.
I love the
and you're gonna go in there, and you're gonna come out, and you're gonna face the dragon, and then we're gonna go on to the next cave.
Yeah, here's journey.
And we're just gonna walk together, and you're gonna unpack whatever you saw in there, and we're gonna keep on going. But that's another thing that gets thrown around, life coaching. And everyone's a coach, everyone's a this, everyone's a that. And I think experience you can't dismiss experience, but there's a lot of charlatans in the mental health and wellness space, especially now. And it goes back to that New York City thing. You feel it. Right. You feel it. There's a feeling there there's an authenticity piece that's missing. That goes for the same thing in like physical health and wellness, right?
Yep.
Because you could be aesthetically perfect, right? Perfect. But if there's no depth there, it's almost superficial.
Yeah. You're an empty
see right
shell,
through. Yeah.
Right. And I did a podcast. It hasn't been released, actually. I've been asking the guy when he's going to release it, right? Where I went off on life coaches a little bit.
Sure.
Right. And I actually was like laying in bed that night. Excuse me, on a burp. And being like, hey, should I message him and have him take that out? right? Because again, it's like that first talk, second talk, third talk, and like driving home later and be like, oh, I didn't say this. Like, why did I say that? The thing about, like, I have no problem with journeymen for hire, which I love that phrasing, or life coaches. The problem is that a lot of these individuals that you will see on social media, you will see out there in the world, how do I phrase this? We as mental health professionals, right? We are regulated by state and federal laws. We have met very specific educational requirements of culturally appropriate, ethical work to guide people through significant trauma, significant issues, right? When I see people on Instagram, when they've taken a course or something and they say like, I will heal your traumas, they stay in the lane, right? There's a lot of people who can do people a lot of harm by not, and they actually like re-traumatizing them without the actual interventions that are so highly regulated that you need malpractice insurance, you need federal and state regulators and ethics boards to regulate us actually working with these people, right? So there's nothing wrong with like what's going on there. I mean, I work with guys who are coaches, right? I'm working with guys as a clinician, which is why it's like some life coaches are going to be more expensive than therapy, but it's so much easier for men to be like, oh, I got a life coach, or I have a coach now, as opposed to I'm seeing a therapist, because of the stigma behind it. And that's what I think is fucked up, because as a mental health clinician with a number of other letters after my name.
You do.
Right?
Let me read some off for you. Hold on. I wrote them down. You're a LMHC licensed mental health counselor.
Correct.
You are a MCAP. Don't know what that is.
Master's level addiction certified professional.
Okay. You're a CCAPT, or did I write C twice?
Certified clinical anxiety treatment professional.
You're an NCC.
National certified counselor.
There you go.
Yeah, those are those, right? I've done a lot of work to get those things. And sometimes it'll be cheaper, quicker, and easier for guys to come to me to work on these things as opposed to going to a life coach for a year or two, right? To where they can come in, do that deeper work, and have results faster from a professional in my capacity, or a licensed mental health counselor, or an LPC, or a full doctorate psychotherapist, right?
Oh, that's right.
Right, because the thing is like, oh no, men going to therapy, that's not okay. Life coach, fine, right? So there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I've worked with guys in junction with life coaches,
Sure.
right? So that I'm there to kind of guide this more like deeper aspects of it. I just think you're right, like a lot of charlatans, et cetera, et cetera. There's really no major regulatory boards.
Right.
Besides like one or two.
There's two. Yeah.
There's some national things which are much better, right? But to the point where if I fuck a client up, I could lose my license. I could be adjudicated against, right? To where there have been some people who were therapists who fucked up, right? Bad, right? Whether it was like, significant malfeasance where they were not taking care of a client and they died by suicide. They slept with one of their clients, some really heavy, gnarly shit, have their license taken away. And then they just go get a life training certification or whatever, and just remarket themselves that way because they can go do whatever they want then. Right. So like, I just want to make sure that people are being treated appropriately for the issues that they have, which is why I talk about it that way. I have no problem with it. I just think it's really important for people to understand what's in their scope of practice and what's not. Right.
Yeah. And I think experience is the ultimate teacher,
right? Because
you could fill out all the bubbles on the test and get 100%. But if you don't have the lived experience,
correct,
you're just going by the textbook
and the training, the specific trainings, which then you're gonna have supervision hours with it,
right?
Or having supervisors who've been clinicians for 15, 20, 25 years, guiding you along that path to make sure that you're the most effective clinician that you can be.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the thing is like, I know I'm part of a supervision group years into my practice, right? Years into my full licensure. I don't have to do it, but I'm a part of a group of like veteran clinicians. I'm the youngest one in there because those OGs have a shit ton of experience.
Right.
I still don't know what I'm doing at times.
Right.
Right. And it's so important to have that, but also have that mentality of the beginner's mindset of like, no, I'm an expert in specific areas. But if a guy contacts me, and he's like, yeah, dude, I'll pay you a month in advance. And he comes to me about something like gambling, right? Or an eating disorder. I'm not going to take him. My expertise is not in that area. I can work. Hey, man, go work on that. And if you want to come back for the masculinity and the life type stuff, cool. Come back to me. right? But I'm going to send people to specific experts in those areas because I don't have any fucking experience or expertise in there.
Sure.
Now, I could treat it.
Right.
I could go do the research. I'm capable. I'm licensed to do so, but I don't feel comfortable doing that.
But isn't something like that also no different than the job being the issue? Like, isn't something like an eating disorder or gambling, isn't that something that is a surface level expression of a deeper problem
100%.
that you would be able to essentially get to?
100%. But the thing is that it's the trainings and the interventions along with it to help them with that. Because the thing about it this way, right? And this is where, like, again, most men are like, all right, this is the problem. What's the solution? Right? Like, guys will come in if they feel comfortable, like start dumping childhood trauma on me out the gate.
Right.
They're like, okay, what do I do about it? I go, whoa. Right. We'll get there. Right. Like, I'm capable of assessing and treating sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, depending on the experience of like what it looks like and how it's impacting their life then. Right. I much might be, okay, cool. If they can afford it, right? See me. And then once a week, right, I want you to go see like a trauma expert, which that's the only thing they do. Right. It's the same thing. It's like, okay, well, technically a regular MD or like a practitioner doctor can write you scripts for SSRIs or other medications, right? But why would you not want to go see a psychiatrist who specializes in those things? So those guys will come in and be like, all right, man, like, I was sexually assaulted as a child, right? What's the solution? Like, okay, let's talk about this for a second. Let's say I have a gunshot wound to the chest, a broken arm and 2 broken legs. Which one is the ER going to address first? Right. They're going to go for the gunshot wound, right? So if I got a guy who comes in saying that he was sexually abused, right, or he's about to get divorced, whatever it is like that, right, some really heavy shit in his life, and he's also an alcoholic, and he's womanizing, he's out there just cheating, we need to talk about the alcoholism first. That's the major issue. We need to learn to deal with life on life's terms first, so that I know this guy can cope with going to that deeper trauma work. So the thing is that, like, yeah, we'll get there, but I need to be ethical. I'm not just going to start ripping open wounds out the gate. I need to make sure that you are capable of self-regulating, and that if we don't have a session where we talk about the childhood trauma, then you go down to the Seminole Hard Rock Casino down the road in Hollywood, get an 8-ball of blow, a hooker, and 2 bottles of Jack Daniels when your wife and kids are at home. Right. We need to do these things in a proper sequence, or with an intervention that is not going to re-traumatize them, because there's a lot of trauma interventions like EMDR where, like, you don't have to tell me what fucking happened. You don't need to say it. I can guide you through the EMDR protocols and you can process this stuff on your own. Right. But we're still going to make sure that we're doing it ethically in the right sequence and making sure that you can handle your shit afterwards. Right. So that's the idea of, like, really having that expertise, but then making sure that you're being ethical in your treatment and making sure that you're not fucking people up.
Yeah. And it's letting them swim out to the deep end, right? Rather than just throwing them in, which there is something to be said about dropping someone in the deep end and letting them figure their way out, right? Figure their way out of the deep end. But when it comes to things like trauma, that can just open up a whole completely different world and floodgates
that's why we have inpatient facilities, right? Like, I got guys who can, they're wealthy, right? They have the resources, or they have insurance, right? Because I'm a cash pay practice. Like, listen, man, cool, right? Q1, right? My business guys, all right, man. Hey, let's look at some programs. You can go do an executive program for 2 weeks and you just deep dive, right? You're in a safe, secure environment. There's no risk of you leaving and going and overdosing, right? Because every single fucking drug has fentanyl in it now, right? You think you're buying like Xanax on the street? No. Break some of that up, put it in a test kit, guarantee you it has fentanyl in it, right? They go and they can do these inpatient stays for 2-3 weeks, a month. You can step down to intensive outpatient where you're living at home, but then still having support throughout the day. We can do these trauma deep dives. You can do what are called quote unquote intensives, right? But you need to do it in the right way.
Hello, friends. How are you? Just want to take a quick, brief break from the podcast, talk about a piece of gear that I've been rocking nonstop, and that's Wowie shorts. WowieLife.com, the Nomad 2.0s. They are super diverse. They're super comfortable. They've got this unique little stylish trim on the pocket, different on each color. I got them in green, I got them in blue, the black are in the laundry. They come with a lining, so you don't have to waste a pair of underwear, which is huge. I wear them to jiu-jitsu, I wear them on the trail, I wear them to the beach, I wear them out to dinner. They're super diverse, they're super comfortable, they're family owned, which is always awesome. And they just released a new pair of sweatpants called the Ramblers and the Flow, which they are so dope. I can't get enough of them. I wear them all the time. They're pretty much the only pair of shorts I'm rocking these days. And for listeners of this podcast, you can get 15% off of your entire purchase with the promo code VBShow. So head on over to wowielife.com, grab yourself a pair of the Nomad 2.0s. Those are my personal favorite, and you will not regret it. Check them out, wowielife.com. Now back to the show.
Like, I know a lot of clinicians that will do weekend intensives with couples and everything else like that. Sure. I work in the same building as some therapists who, like, their clients will fly in from across the country, stay there in a home with a sober companion, and they will do deep intensive work for a week and just crack them the fuck open, right? And then you can slowly integrate back into your home. You can go home and do a lot of work that way. That's not the way that I operate personally. Sure. We're going to start, my colleague and I are going to start developing some couples intensives. But again, it's going to be not doing deep, intensive trauma work. Yeah.
You bring up trauma, and you had a quote on one of your posts, and it's from Dune. Fear is the mind killer. It is the little death that brings little total obliteration.
Yes.
Fear is a motherfucker.
Fear is insidious.
But if you're able to point out the fear,
yes,
I find that when I am feeling anything, right, and this is, usually with my children or whatever I'm coming up against, if I'm able to speak it out loud and say it,
if you name it, you can tame it.
Right. I am in a better position to wrestle with it.
110%.
So when my kids are on my last nerve, right before I'm about to fucking snap, I say, guys, daddy's here.
Yep.
And you know what happens when I go past here. Mm-hmm. So I'm giving you the warning. Mm-hmm. And by speaking it out loud, I'm able to manage the here.
Yes.
I'm able to, okay, I'm giving myself this space. And fear is no different than that.
No.
If you're able to, and you could replace fear with anxiety, I think.
No, one of the biggest components of doing anxiety work is just acknowledging that this is anxiety.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
Because then it's like, oh, okay, this is just my anxiety. I mean,
and then alchemizing that, because anxiety is no different than excitement, right? It's the same exact thing.
Very close. They're part of the same reptilian brain with the autonomic nervous system, right? So the same thing with, like, I go to a lot of concerts, right? The pre-show jitters, right? Just that excitement it mimics anxiety. It's almost the exact same thing.
I just competed in a jiu-jitsu tournament yesterday.
Mm-hmm. You did very well.
I got gold. I did.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure when this is coming out, but I did. And I realized, leading up to it and the days before it and even the day of, I was just feeling, I was like, I'm getting anxious about this. Mm-hmm. And then I'd stop myself and say, no, dude, you're excited.
Yes.
And that's okay.
Yes.
Like, lean in, observe the feeling. Don't give it a name, because the name is what's going to put you down the rabbit hole, and that's what's going to snowball, and that's what the result is going to be. Mm-hmm. Not if you just say, I'm feeling this thing. What is this thing? It's anxiety. Okay, but it's also excitement. Okay, I'm going to lean towards excitement.
Yeah. Because
anxiety is going to cost me to lose.
It's the story. It's the narrative that we have in our heads, right? 100%. We tell ourselves a specific story. We're going to run with that. It's going to go down those very well-worn neurologic pathways.
Oh, they're so comfortable.
Oh, that rut is beautiful, right? It's the same thing, guys, and people in early recovery, right? I'm much more comfortable sitting in my little pile of shit knowing that I'm dying. Right. Than to break outside of it, because that's the it's not so much the fear of the unknown, it's fear of losing the known. Right. So one of the things, like, with the fear aspect of it, there's another quote. Like, I'm a huge fantasy guy, love reading dark, like, grim, dark fantasy, swords, dragons, magic, etc. Et right.
Who are you talking to?
My jam. Right. I just started the Dresden Chronicles for like 14th time. Right. But there's, in the first Law trilogy,
I'm reading the Bible.
Yeah. Love it. Yeah. It's there's this character called Logan Nine Fingers, right? And he's like kind of like a
He works at a ski resort as well.
no, Logan, he's a gnarly, like berserker like character, right? But he has this quote: "It's better to do something than to live with the fear of it." Because the whole idea is that fear is the mind killer. Once we identify that we're afraid of something, it's going to push us back, right? Because again, if we look at what fear comes from, the same root as anxiety. This is an evolutionary holdout that has been keeping our species alive and all other animals alive for hundreds, if not millions of years. Fear is there to keep us safe of something that we identify is a risk or we may be potentially harmed by. So the whole idea is when I came into sobriety, right? I went in and looked at, okay, I have been living my life by all these fears. And it's something that we look in the 4th step inventory, right? I have all of these fears. If I continue to live my life by these fears, what's the fucking point of getting sober? So the whole idea is that when I identify that there's fear there, right? Like before I get on stage, right? And I'm an expert in this field. There's no one else in my area down in Florida that really focuses on the men's issue stuff and is as public with this information as I am, right? Now, if I was doing a presentation on codependency, most of those other clinicians in there know more about it than I do, right? So I'd have much more of an imposter syndrome. But when I'm up there talking about the men's stuff, no, I'm the fucking expert here. So I feel much more comfortable. Even with that, and I know this presentation by heart, I know the little quip. I'm not reading off of the slides, right? My personality is going to come out and I'm going to bust chops and make jokes. I still have that drop in my stomach, full panic like fear as they're introducing me to come up onto the stage, right? Every single time. And I label it as anxiety and fear. But if I knew, and I know that fear is going to hit, I know that anxiety is going to hit, if I made decisions to not put myself out there to present on these topics, to not go on podcasts, to not do these things, the shame and guilt that I'm going to experience afterwards is going to be brutal. I will not allow myself to be ruled by that anymore. Now, of course, I'm still human, right? There's still things like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do this, right? But the whole idea is that if I walk through this fear, I say there's going to be 2 potentialities. Either it's going to blow up in my fucking face and it's not going to go well at all, and my worst fear is going to come true, or I can walk through it and it can go really well or somewhat well, right? But regardless of those 2 outcomes, I can still turn around at the man that I was in that moment and say, you know what? I still went for it. And that is, for me personally, far more important to actually walk through the fear and challenge it as opposed to shrink from it and step back, because that's the old version of me, right? I want to think about, in those moments where I'm faced with some type of decision, what would the man that I want to become do in this moment? What would the idealized version, the self-actualized version of myself do in this moment? And 9 times out of 10, if I try to do that thing, it's going to go well. I'm going to be proud of myself, right? I'm going to have a healthy sense of autonomy and self-efficacy. These things I didn't experience for years, even if it blows up in my fucking face, right? It's almost that whole concept of better to have loved than to never loved at all.
Sure.
I'd rather go into a relationship, be crumpled, right, where she chooses in those moments of pain, a better man than I,
Sure.
taller, better looking,
Sure.
makes more money, right, probably has a fucking bigger cock,
Right.
All of those things go and be on the floor of my bathroom, curled up in a little ball, crying, right, than to have not gone into it at all.
Right.
100%. Now, in those moments when I'm really feeling it, yeah, no, I don't want to.
Right.
Why did I do this? I saw the red flags. What was I thinking? Why would she want to be with me in the first place? But then it's like, after all that comes out, then, okay, come back to it. I am good enough. I'm perfect just the way that I am. If she didn't want to be with me, power, God, grant her all the peace and love.
Namaste.
Yeah, all the peace and love. I hope she has everything that she wants in her life the same way I want it for mine. Yeah. But it's going to take time before I get to fuck, I hate the blah, 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 blah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's interesting because you mentioned the word unknown. And I think creating a healthy, whatever that even means, a healthy relationship with the unknown is one of the things that so many people run away from.
Oh,
And that's why I have
yes.
that quote, all of humanity's
Yep.
problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. I reference that a lot.
Mhm.
And I reference my personal journey in sensory deprivation tanks.
Mhm.
And there's nothing more unknown than the depths of your own soul.
That's what we avoid. That's what we've been taught to avoid for our entire lives, is to avoid that shadow side, what we're possibly capable of, that discomfort, that pain, that heartbreak when we were young kids. We've been taught to shove it all down, right? Because we don't know what it's going to be like if we actually go towards those things.
And in that jujitsu tournament, that's a huge unknown.
Oh yeah.
And walking, and my wife was like, "Hey, do you want us to come?" And I was like, I don't know. And I asked myself, well, why don't you want them to come? And I said, I don't want them to see me lose. I said, well, then you shouldn't go at all. Because if you're walking there and you're already lost, don't even bother. Don't even bother. It's not worth it.
Or if you lose what your wife and your children might think of you.
Right. What does that even mean? I know how much they love me. I know it doesn't matter what the outcome would be. It truly doesn't. And I know that. But the self that was protecting me and the fear of just them seeing me lose and not being the best man I could be was literally crippling me for like a quick minute. And then I literally just asked myself, well, why?
Right.
Why don't you want them to come? And I was like, I'm afraid they're going to see me lose. And I said, okay.
It's that ego thing. Just I need to present this idea, this concept of being cool, et cetera, et cetera. I just, because I'm dating now, right? So I'm trying to like identify people, et cetera, et cetera. And a little while ago, there was this young lady I was talking to, and she's like, "Oh, I dance," right? She's like loves to dance, right? Now I have rhythm, I go to shows, I can dance and stuff like that, but like the idea of being in a dance class or at like a space specifically for dancing, right, terrifies me. Because again, it's that ego. Well, it's like, I'm this cool guy, I'm this integrated male, I've done all this work on myself.
Well, look at me,
like right, this spiritual
high. I've got mala beads,
right? Yeah, right, because it's the same thing. It's like my initial go-to, right, is that I one up, right. If I walk into a room, right, my initial instinct is like, oh, like this guy does this, or he has this, or et cetera, right?
External validation pieces,
right? Like, how can I cut them down in my head so that I feel good enough, right? Sure. And it used to be I would live there. Now I go up a little bit, like, oh, nope, my brothers and sisters in this thing, right? We're all unique in their same way, et cetera. Like the much more new age, spiritual stuff, right? But the idea is that, again, it's that if I might be perceived as less than, right, how am I going to overcompensate that? Right. And it's the whole idea of that balance of idea of like, and for me at times it's like, I'm well integrated knowing what my defects are, right? One of the things that I hear from people, right, is that like, oh, Phil's arrogant, he's a dick, right? And it's part of my Northeast things. I'm around not a lot of Northeasterners. Like, if I'm busting your balls, it means that I like you, right? But I do come off at times as arrogant, as somewhat self-interested, etc., and I fucking hate it, because I know I identify that in myself as a characteristic that I have that I do not like, and I do not want to be perceived that way, right? And it's the same idea as like if it's with embarrassment or like looking goofy or kind of looking stupid, right? There's a massive part of me that's like, who gives a shit? Whatever, just go do it, right? And I do sometimes, but there's other parts of me that are like, right? Don't go towards that. So it's this idea of like, again, that back and forth of like, well, I'm not going to do something unless I know I'm going to be good at it. But then how am I going to grow? Like if I don't go into the, jujitsu competition and potentially lose, right? Because it's like a battle, then am I really living to these value systems that I have? Am I going to be showing, if I quit or not go, right? Just because my son or my daughter might see me lose, am I putting out there, am I teaching them the right way to handle loss? How do they handle adversity?
Well, that's what it ultimately came to, was the fact that no matter what the outcome is, there's something there that I can show them.
Yes.
The end result of it, no matter what the outcome is.
And I love that. I knew that's where you went with that. I knew that already. Right.
You did something. You did 5 stages of a midlife crisis.
Yes, on my Instagram reels.
On your Instagram reels. Yes. And I want to talk about that because it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Obviously, the midlife crisis, this cultural preconceived idea that men reach a certain age and then we're all just going to resort back to our childlike selves and just seek nothing but validation and all these things, where, and we kind of spoke about it as well at the time of, you know, that 20-year-old age, late 20s, there's a real crisis going on with that as well.
Yes.
And I think with the lack of integration at that age, it now leads into the midlife crisis, which really is an opportunity for an awakening and really a realization, right?
Yes.
And you brought up 5 major points of that. I'm going to read them off and then just use any one of them as a particular, you know, crisis of value, crisis of intimate relationships, the child, aging parents, and letting go.
Yes.
And we could talk on each one of them, but the 2 that really stood out to me probably the most were the first and the fifth, obviously the bookends of those values, 2, which is the values and the letting go.
Yes.
Because one leads you into it, right? The values, everything you know is being challenged. Everything you are is being challenged.
Nothing is free of this.
Nothing makes sense.
Crisis of faith, career choices. It doesn't matter. Anything is up for grabs there.
And then the letting go, which is almost the end result of that, right? And then you have that great book, Letting Go.
Yeah, Michael Singer.
Yeah.
Yep.
It allows you to step into a space where you ultimately have to let go in order to surrender to something bigger than yourself.
Right. The thing with all of these is that up until that point in their life, whatever they thought that they were going to get to, right? And this can be for females as well, right? 100%. Like when the empty nest syndrome, right? The mother was a mother for, you know, 18, 20 years, depending on the spacing of the kids, and the kids go off and then it's like, okay, well, now what the fuck my identity? Like, what is this? Right. But it is this point in their lives, right? Specifically with men, is that there was this guiding force, this guiding idea, right? Of they hit, you know, their early 50s, mid 50s, they're still middle management. They're not the CEO, right? Or they didn't achieve a financial goal at that time, or they thought that they would be somewhere different at that place, right? And they're like, oh shit, what now? Right? Because the value system, like this could be crisis of faith, right? Is that the value, let's say it was power and success, that was their guiding force of like going into the city and working the 9 to 5 for 60, 70 hours a week, hitting middle management, making 200 grand per year. And they get to this age of like, oh, none of these things made me happy. I'm still unhappy, right? The intimate relationships, we've been married for 20, 30 years. My body's changed, her body's changed, our lives have changed significantly. What is this relationship? We feel like we've grown apart. The children, this is where the idea is like, oh, my kids are turning out to be shitbags, right? Or the goals that I had for my family or my kids are not lining up from what their lives are actually coming to, right? The same thing with the caretaking, the flip of the parents. The whole idea is that whatever was their guiding force, concepts, ideas, political affiliations, faith systems, right? Their own goals themselves, they realize at some point that it's no longer working for them. Something isn't right.
I think and it goes back to the sessions you have with your clients. The job seems to be the leading, one of the leading sources of that, because you know, you do climb this ladder and you go into this world of what you should be doing. And, you know, a good barometer for me, and I've spoken about this before in the podcast, but with jujitsu, with this podcast, with the coaching, with the brick and mortar I'm opening up in the, you know, in the spring, if it doesn't become the most successful version of it, if I do not become a black belt, do I still do it? And if the answer is yes, you're good. If the answer is no, figure it out.
It's you're moving in the wrong direction, right?
Correct.
I have a guy I'm working with. He's a younger cat. Like he just wants to make money. I'm like, good fucking luck, dude. Right? It doesn't matter what he wants to do. He just wants to make money for a specific lifestyle. Again, because it's that pattern and that counter to him growing up. And he grew up in a decent family, right? They had resources. But again, his parents got divorced. There's some financial stuff that happened, right? And he doesn't want to have to like deal with that ever again, right? So of course I can understand why he's doing that. But again, if I'm working with a guy and it's the only motive for working is money, right?
It will never be enough.
It's never going to be enough. He will never find that contentment, right? Because I don't talk to guys about happiness. Happiness is a fleeting state, right? We go into it, we come out of it. what I ask my guys to shoot for is to really look at their value system. And I have different ways of doing this. Like you put like, there's like 70 different values. I'm like, all right, pick 20. They pick 20. All right, take that 20, 15, 10, and then the top 7. And I have them rank the bottom 4, and then each one going up to that to be their most important ones. And then I ask them the question, how in your current life right now are you integrating these values into it? Most of the time it's not, right? Like if these guys have like family and growth and they're working 70 hours a week and they're neglecting all of these things, et cetera, et cetera. I'm like, all right, man, well, it's fucking bullshit. You're living incongruently with what you say that you want to do. So then we work on how we integrate that back in. But again, if they're operating on a value system of like money, power, women, et cetera, at some point, these guys are going to identify that they're empty. They're not going to be values that are going to filling up their purpose or their meaning, right? So it's about coming back to it and identifying what their needs are inside that are not being met, or they identify, oh shit, these things I've been dedicating 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years of my life towards are not going to check the box. Fuck, I need a huge change. Divorce the wife, get the sports car, right? Move.
The stereotypical midlife.
Stereotypical thing, because a massive part of that is like, oh my God, my body's breaking down. I'm not able to lift as much weight, right? My bones hurt in the morning. I just watched my father die, right? He worked every day for the union, raking his body, et cetera, et cetera. I can't let that be me. So they make this overly huge shift and just like try to change everything. But again, it's going to be empty because they're doing it for the wrong reasons. They're taking the wrong way of going about it, right? Do the same thing living in Florida, right? I see these guys who are in their 70s, jet black hair, right? They're still wearing like affliction t-shirts, right? You have like some decently looking 30-year-old woman, right? But I look at that and it's like, again, this is my own like initial better than mentality of like looking at that and like almost sympathy of like, that sucks for that guy.
Yeah.
He feels that he has to live that way in order to be happy and have these things, right? And it's the spiritual high top, like, oh, he's walking around asleep. He doesn't know how good it can be, right? But then come back into it and be like, well, who the fuck am I to say that? Right. So again, that's the constant battle in between this one up and going back and forth for me.
Who are you to say that? But at the same time, no, the knowing that resides within you, you can only say, hey, that wouldn't work for me.
Correct.
You know, right? Like knowing it's yourself.
My own biases coming out.
Correct.
And like the way that I view the world. And that's like the initial way that I do it. But then I come back into it and be like, okay, no, like, who am I to judge this guy? This might be, he might just be repeating these patterns. Sure, I might be able to guide these guys differently. He might just be fucking happy. Right. He may not want to do the deeper work. He doesn't give a shit about meditation or archetypes and shadow sides. He's like, fuck that, man. I'm gonna smoke cigars and play golf and I'm gonna kick it with these young chicks. Right. Like who am I to say that? Right. I still do.
Right. Of course.
That's my own shit.
Well, that's you know, whether you want to call it God, the universe, source, the force, whatever you want, that's that true way of living coming through.
Yes.
And it really is why you're in the position you're in, is to, you know, to honor the best version of good, right? To step into a space where you are doing the best thing, and what's best for you may not be best for everyone.
Correct.
But on a deeper metaphorical level, you want to go Game of Thrones, you want to go whatever, the Bible, whatever you want to go with, there's something that ties time and space and humanity together that's rooted in what you're perceiving as good.
Yes.
And that is something that is undeniable. He may just want to play golf and smoke cigars and live that life, but deep down, deep down, on the deepest level that he may not be willing to go into the elevator and go to the basement, there's somewhere deep inside himself that he knows, no matter who it is, the soul level, he knows it's not all of it.
Correct.
It's just a matter if he wants to go to the depths of it.
And whether, you know, whether it'll be worth it, right? Whether
I think it's always worth it.
Yeah, well, we understand
here we are,
that with our fucking mentalities, but for some other people, it's like, no. Right? It's not worth it. right? It's not worth to go through that pain. Like, why rock the boat now? I'm having a decent life, or I'm having a good life, et cetera, et cetera, right? Some people are not called to that side. And it's the same thing. It's like, if I start working with a guy, right, and like, I never assume they're going to come back, right? So in the first couple sessions, before I actually establish a relationship with a guy, right, I always say like, hey man, assuming you come back and you're cool with my face, right, this is what we potentially could do. And I always tell guys, I'm like, listen, man, if we work together for a little bit of time, even if it's like for like a couple months, and you come to me like, hey dude, this isn't working, cool, man, like, what are you looking for, right? I don't give a shit who you're going to get it with, just as long as you're going to get it, right? If you want to do deeper trauma work, or you want like a female clinician, or whatever it might be, dude, I have a huge network of referral sources. I have no problem handing you off to someone. I will make that transition as easy as humanly possible. Just do not go dark on me. Do not run, right? Work on some things we talked about. Come to me like, hey man, this isn't working out for me. All right, man, cool. Is there something that, you feel comfortable speaking to me about that I might be able to modify, and we can continue to keep working together? If not, that's cool, man. Just tell me what you're looking for, and I can help put your hand in somebody else's. It's the same thing with my recovery. If I'm working with the sponsee, he's like, yeah, dude, this isn't working out for me. Cool. Run it, right? I got no problem with you going to somebody else, as long as you're going to get it from somebody else, right? As long as I really want you just to continue on with this journey towards your betterment, towards your self-actualization, towards your quote unquote enlightenment, so that you can become the man that you want to become. Right.
Yeah. And I think a big problem is that most people don't know who they want to become.
Right.
Because they don't sit quietly by themselves and muster through all of the soot and the difficulties, and realize that you are not your thoughts. You are not your experience. You are your experiences, but those experiences are only based on the person that was experiencing at that time. And you're able to shift past that and move past that. And for me, again, just to circle back to it, it was meditation and sensory deprivation and sitting with very uncomfortable thoughts, and just sitting there and Rubik's cubing my brain. And then it became a rubber band ball, and I was plucking away at the rubber bands. And then it became a flashlight behind a piece of construction paper. And then it became the 0 point that John C. Lilly talks about, where, it's void and abundance floating through the cosmos, completely, feeling absolutely nothing, but feeling everything. And that's just the beginning of it.
Right.
That's just the beginning of it. But most people do not want to face that. That feeling of the 0 point was the most debilitating thing I had ever experienced. And I only pecked its lips. And it was completely beautiful. It was so wonderful. But it was wild. I try to explain to people, I'm like, this is not doing it any justice.
It's the same thing. It's like trying to explain the bottom, right? It's the same, like, being a clinician who's in recovery, guys will come to me and talk about what it's like to, not want to drink or drug, but literally not being able to not do it. And I can say like, yeah, dude, I get it. Right. I understand what it's like there. But most people, right, if we look at, most of their lives, like, they don't have anyone in their life who has done this deeper work. They're not even aware of it. Or if it is, they do like see it on an Instagram feed, or they see it on this or that, right? It doesn't call to them from a deeper level. And that's okay. Right. Some people, it's like they're not meant for it in this life, right? Who knows how many other iterations that they've been through, like whatever your faith system is, etc., of like the suffering that they have to go through before they get there, right? Who fucking knows, right? I might be looking at that guy with the jet black hair and, this,
hitting links
and stuff like that. Like, he might become one of the next like Buddhas. I don't fucking know, right? In the next, I don't know. But that's still like my human bias, my human way of like approaching things. But then again, like stepping back from it and then putting it through like the new agey spiritual filter. Right. And that's where I think like a lot of my work, right? Like, I love that analogy of like the Rubik's Cube, like, what the fuck do I do with this? The rubber band ball, the construction paper with the light, because there'll be times where I'll be working with guys, or even within my own personal development, of like, I'll think of a pretty clear idea of what's up. And then it's like, oh man, what about behind that door? Right? Like a door pops up, or like a curtain. You're like, oh shit, what the fuck is on.
Right.
I
Right.
thought I was good here.
Come
Oh,
on. Trust me. You're not good. Fuck.
oh shit. And that's
Yeah.
and that's what for recently, right? Like I did that huge 3-hour presentation. I recorded it, and it was like my kind of like the reason why I was doing all this work for. And then afterwards, I was like, oh, what now?
Yeah.
I was like, ah. So then a few months ago, like
Back to the whiteboard.
yeah, I know I had that void. I'm like, okay, what's up? And I was like considering the PhD, which I'm gonna do. It's just a matter of when. And I started like this and that, and I was in that supervision group of the veterans. Like, yeah, Phil, like, I don't think you need any more accolades. Right now.
As we read them off.
Yeah, like, and I was like, yeah, it's time to do the deeper work myself. So that's why I'm doing the John Weiland training. That's why I'm doing like the Trevor Bain, the Connor Beaton, like all these guys, like the personal development men stuff, and starting to go into some of those areas that I thought I had done a lot of work on. But I feel like personally, I've been walking on the plane, right? I still like, I'm walking on the plane and see a ravine and I'll jump in a little bit with like the weightlifting or the cold plunges or like, you know, diets and like all these ways of challenging myself. But then it's like, oh, that's right. I've been walking on this plane in one direction, but the mountain range is over to my right, and there's a massive canyon that I'm kind of just walking along, like waiting for an easier way across to get to that mountain range. And I think of like Frodo and Sam and all that, like, oh no, man, I gotta go into that canyon. So that's where I'm kind of orienting myself towards now, like knowing from January through June is going to be fucking gnarly, personal development wise, on top of like growing the business and doing all those things. But again, like I feel that I'm in that position of having the tools necessary to walk into the woods, as Iron John would say, right? Or Robert, Robert Bly would say, right? Like there's that call to adventure. There's that call to getting to that deeper level. And I'm scared.
Sure.
I don't know what it's going to look like, right? And my brain is doing that. Well, how do we mitigate? How can we do this? Like,
how do I figure this out?
Like, how do we can do this? How can we make it more comfortable, etc. But it's like, no, man, like I have to, in order not to be a hypocrite with the guys that I work with and be like, hey man, you're gonna have to go into that dark corner where the devil wouldn't go with even a flashlight. When I haven't done that work personally in like a year or two, like, okay, no, I have to go do that work now.
Yeah.
And it's scary.
Yeah.
But I know without a doubt in my mind that it's exactly what my energy and what my soul and what Phil needs and what little Phil needs.
Sure.
Right. Those younger versions of himself.
And future Phil.
Yep.
And future Phil.
Yep.
Future Phil needs it just as much as little Phil and current Phil.
Yep.
Right. All the Phils need that work.
And God willing, Phil Jr. maybe.
Oh, all right.
I mean, I don't know if I'll name my kid Phil, but
I'm the second. My son's I'm a junior. My son's the third.
Yeah. But my future children, if God's or my higher power, the universe, source, great spirit sees it in my cards, I'm gonna have to do that work in order to be that best version of myself, not only to attract the partner that is going to be able to meet my needs and meet her needs at an energetic and spiritual and physical level. I have to make sure that I'm that best version of myself before I can attract those things.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Or you have to do it while you're in limbo with those things, while you're in dancing with those things. Of course. And that becomes a completely different dynamic.
Yep.
You know, but beautiful nonetheless.
For me, it's the only way now. There's no going back.
Oh, there's no going back.
Nah, I mean, of course I can start drinking again, but for me, it's like, it's not even about the picking up a white chip or resetting the clock. For me to drink again would amount to a spiritual death.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would be able to come back from it.
Yeah.
Personally.
Nah, it's not worth it.
No.
It's just not worth it.
No.
You know, and you know, you have to tap into that golden thread. That golden thread that's something that and we'll talk about it more at another time, but that's real. You know, that magic of life is real, you know, and people want to dismiss it. And it's so easy to dismiss, and people will say, oh, well, not everything's that deep. And, you know, but when you live in the mythological, then you could see the Narnia of the world that you're playing in. it really is just, it's magic. It's fucking magic, you know,
You're
and
right.
it's so cool.
It's almost impossible to explain to people. Like when I sit down with a guy who's like 2-3 weeks out of drinking, just got a treatment or detox, to explain to them the feeling of knowing that no matter what happens, I'm going to be okay because my higher power, source, spirit, whatever he, she, they, them, it is. I don't know what my higher power is,
Right.
but to try to explain to them that innate sense of comfort and contentment, that knowing that no matter what horrible, tragic things happen to me or the people around me, knowing that I am going to be safe and protected and okay, and I will be able to handle anything that comes along my way. It's nothing like there's this joy inside.
Yeah.
Right. It's this deep, it's almost like a weight, but like a weighted blanket. Right. It's like a little scary, but like, oh no, I'm safe. I'm okay.
I like this.
Right.
Well, that's,
Right.
I mean, that's something I've learned through jujitsu, to be honest with you, is when there's someone trying to smother you and you can't breathe and you're like, you want to go into, oh fuck. And that's the worst thing you could do, because you have to just settle in. And it goes to your last point, right?
Embrace the suck.
Let go. Right. Even in the ice bath, the plunge, right? The more you're that, the worse you are. And if you could just let go, it'll be okay. You know, you may be in that desert, but if you use that compass and that thread and that magic to guide you, you will find your way through it. Where? I have no idea. Neither do you. Neither does anybody. That's the unknown.
Yep.
That's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of unknown, because the beauty of unknown could be going to the tournament and losing in front of your family, or the beauty of the unknown could be going to the tournament and getting a gold medal.
Yep.
And standing with them, and then having your kids go, oh, I want to compete. You know,
other ways.
Exactly.
2 ways it can go.
Exactly.
And that's the idea. And you don't have to do it alone.
You don't. You have
can
people
walk
like
through
you.
the desert and know that, like, hey, there's guys who've walked this desert before. We can guide you.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Where can people connect with you? Where can people see more, get your services, hear more?
Yep. So I am in Delray Beach, Boca Raton, Florida. You can visit Dude.
You're like an old Yenta.
Yeah.
You're an old Yenta.
Well, that's the thing, is I always make jokes like I'm a Yenta. Like I love, like I'm voyeur, right? Guys like give me all the tea, tell me everything. The thing is, like I say, it's like,
sweetheart, sit down. Let's talk.
Oh, I get it.
Let's talk. Tell me about it.
And I say, it's like, listen, man, like I'm gonna die with a lot of secrets. There's not mine anymore.
Yeah.
Right. So people can find me on my website, dudebreathecounseling.com. On Instagram, my handle is @dudebreathecounseling. Anybody who reaches out to me for assistance or help, I will contact back. Even if you're out of state, you can't afford me, you're not sure what the fuck is going on. Anybody who contacts me, I can use my resources in other states, ideas. I can connect people if I know people in the area. But anybody who contacts me is going to get a response from me directly. I will talk to people on the phone. I will message with you on Instagram, or my cell phone number is out there, business number, not personal.
Google Voice.
Yeah, Google Voice number,
Sure.
Right? It's the whole idea is
Which one do I have?
Personal.
Oh, look at that. All right.
Anybody who contacts me, my whole goal is just to be of purpose, right? It's not about having the TED talk. It's not about writing the book. Of course, these are things that I want to achieve in the future, but if I don't achieve them, great. I've already made a purpose. I already know what my deeper, ikigai is.
I love the ikigai.
Doing this, right?
Right.
I go in, I chop it up with guys. I get paid good money to do it. I don't feel like I'm going to work. Some days I'm going in fucking shorts and a t-shirt and a hat. Be like, what's up, dude? What's good?
That's the dream.
Right. So, @Dude Breathe Counseling on Instagram, right? Message me, share the reels. My website has a bunch of free resources about how to talk to men to getting into therapy. I do individuals work. My colleague, Victoria Chile, she specializes in working with families and fathers. We are here to assist. If it's not us, we will get you in front of somebody else. If you're not sure how to talk to your partner, male partner, your father, your brother, your friend, your employee about getting into therapy, fucking contact me. I will give you guidance. I will give you ideas about how to potentially approach this guy so that they can actually take that jump into getting somewhere where they can potentially be a better version of themselves, right? Because I've been there before. I get it. And just want to be out there as a resource to help people.
That's beautiful. And I think the underlying theme of that is make the call, right?
Yep.
Pick up the phone, whatever you're going through. And it's the cliche of like, I'd rather hear your story than be at your funeral type of thing.
Yep.
But there are
step on your toes than be, step over your grave.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's the thing is reach out, like whoever it is, just like, do not be a man who lives a quiet life of desperation.
I do not hard sell. I do not pitch. I do not do the Instagram, classes about, value points and anything else like that. You be like, hey man, I don't know what's going on. All right, dude, what's up, man?
Right.
What's good?
Right.
Yeah, listen, you don't want it? All right, man, just think about this, man. Hey, try this. Maybe that'll help orient, right? Whatever it is, man, I'm only here to be of service and to try to help guys out. If they come in and get my services, fucking run it, great, right? But again, if you, there's no fancy stuff. You will see me texting you back, yo, what's up, dude?
Right.
Like, what's good, man? Right? It's very friendly, comfortable. It's only here to be a resource to hopefully get more guys in so that we stop killing ourselves 3 to 4 more times than anybody else on this planet. We have the highest rates of violence among ourselves. We have the highest rates of drug and alcohol abuse. We suffer in fucking silence. And I don't want that to happen anymore. So that's why my primary goal is just to be there as a resource.
Beautiful. And thank you for bringing my wife flowers. It was very kind.
It was my pleasure. I was invading her home on a Sunday. It was the least that I could do.
It's very kind.
But yeah, but thank you for inviting me on here. We talked about doing this on, through Zoom and telehealth. And I was like, listen, man, I'm going to be up in New York visiting family for an early Christmas. Let's do this in person. But I just wanted to thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here and speak authentically and be vulnerable and to really model what it could be like for some other guys out there who are on the fence and be like, hey man, I'm just like that fucking asshole. He's no different from me. And I'm not.
Yeah.
Right. Just another dude from Long Island.
I was going to say, if a dude from the Long Island and a dude from the Bronx with tattoos, a beard, and a gold medal winning jiu-jitsu practitioner.
I have none of those.
If we could sit here and have this conversation, then there's no reason why anybody else can't.
This is what my therapy sessions look like.
Right?
It's not fancy shit. It's like, all right, man, what's good?
Yeah.
And what are you feeling?
Right.
I mean, dude, that sucks, man. I'm sorry you're going through that, man.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how we might be able to have some solution to it.
Yeah. And that breaks out, what you said earlier, that norm and expectation of what a therapist is.
Yes.
And I think that's what men need. And once Agora, which is the membership-based community space that I'm opening in the spring, I want to have you come back up.
I would love to
give a speech, give some speaking points, and we'll chop it up again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, man. It was a pleasure. Absolutely.